NFL wide receiver Antonio Brown refuses to come out of his home as police try to arrest him. Former SWAT member Chad Ayers explains the situation. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, let's go over to Tampa, Florida, where an arrest warrant has been issued for Antonio Brown over an alleged domestic violence incident with an unidentified woman. Now, I should tell you that when police tried to apprehend him on these misdemeanor charges, well, apparently the NFL wide receiver has engaged in sort of a standoff with police. Now, at the time of this broadcast, something may have changed, but as of what we currently know, is Tampa police were trying to get him out of his house, and he refused to come out. Now, you might recall that Brown is a free agent. He most recently played with the Buccaneers until his contract was terminated after he just left in the middle of a game. It was kind of a weird situation. I want to bring in what we know so far and what we should be making about this. I'm going to bring in Chad Ayers, former sheriff's deputy for Greenville County in South Carolina, a former member of the SWAT team where he served as an assistant team leader. And I should tell everybody, Chad is currently in a car, but he's not like he's on his way to arrest Antonio Brown. It's not like he's in high-speed pursuit right now. He's doing something else, but I wanted to give everybody that caveat.
Jesse, it's great to be here. I am not driving. I'm actually the passenger in the car, so no worries about that, and I got my seatbelt on, so we're good.
I'm glad you said that because Dan Abrams, our founder, when the Johnny Depp trial came out, he immediately came on air, and he was in the backseat of a car, and we got a million people online saying, how irresponsible of Dan to be driving and giving legal analysis. Totally was not the case. He was in the back seat. He wasn't the driver. So I'm glad you clarified this. All right. So let's get into this, right? So police, again, some of this information's we're learning as it happens, but the way that we understood at least what was happening last night, police go to Antonio Brown's home. They have an arrest warrant. They use a megaphone to have him come out of the house. They say, we're not going anywhere. He refuses to come out. Is that standard operating procedure to arrest somebody like that?
Well, I think that they've got to take everything into account, Jesse, of Antonio Brown. Let's just be honest here. His mental stability in the past has not been at its top. For an arrest warrant, something tells me, I'm sure as we get more information on this, that initially they probably tried to make contact, ring the doorbell, knock on the door, and they probably had some type of intelligence or reason to believe that he was inside the residence. So at that point, they would use some type of PA system to try to convince him to come out and negotiate with him there. So, yeah, if in a law enforcement setting, if I have a pretty good idea that someone's inside the house, then yeah, we would start with PA call outs, trying to get that person to come out and peacefully turn themselves in.
How long can this go on for? Do they just wait outside? I mean, why can't they just go into the house? Why can't they break down the door?
Well, if we look at it, we don't want to force his hand. Someone who is mentally unstable or feels like the weight of the world's on their shoulders. I don't want to put law enforcement's lives in danger or his life. We want this to play out and be as peaceful as possible. So forcing someone's hand and making entry on a situation where he's in there by himself, which news reports are pretty much showing that he's probably in there by himself. We can, in my line of work and in the past when, I was assistant team leader on the SWAT team, I mean, there were standoffs we had for 24, 48 hours where we would just rotate out and attempt negotiations. I think me and you talked, the other day, I think it's over 90% of people in these types of barricaded situations will end up giving up and surrendering peacefully.
And I think what might complicate the situation is what police initially tried to do. So I'm going to give everybody a little bit of a backstory here. They initially tried to apply for a protection order, and this was the quote. They said that Antonio Brown poses a significant danger of causing personal injury to him or herself or others in the near future and beyond by having a firearm or any ammunition in their custody or control, or by purchasing, possessing, or receiving a firearm or any ammunition. The reason they said this is because they believe that Brown had access, I think, to at least 2 guns. And just to complement that, in the affidavit that was attached to this request for the protection order, it said, quote, that Antonio Brown was involved in a recent act or threat of violence against themselves or others, was engaged in an act or threat of violence, including but not limited to acts or threats of violence against themselves within the past 12 months, may be seriously mentally ill or may have recurring mental health issues, has used or threatened to use against themselves or others any weapons, and he's been arrested for, convicted, or had adjudicated, withheld, or there's some other legal language, but basically they're saying he was a threat. Now, that protective order was denied. A judge didn't grant that. Why do you think that was the case, given what they're alleging about Antonio Brown and the fact that that protective order was denied? How does that complicate their attempts to arrest him?
Yeah, I don't think it complicates the arrest. I think when a judge is looking at all the facts of a case, the judge has got to look at the facts. We can't presume that he's got this. They've got to look at the complete facts there. Protection orders are great, especially, we dealt with them a lot in South Carolina. South Carolina is one of the leading states in domestic violence. So there is a lot of benefit in having a protection order there in place. But with that being said, if intelligence is saying that Antonio Brown is in the house and law enforcement is there and has that scene contained, I don't see law enforcement leaving that residence until Antonio Brown is in custody. But again, I can't speak to the judge's reasoning behind that. I think that's going to take some time to see exactly more of the facts in that affidavit for that protection order. With the amount of and the increase of domestic violence across this country and domestic violence that has led to deaths and murders, it does surprise me a little bit. But I think, again, I don't want to speak to anything until we get more of the facts of this case.
That's totally fair. And just to give everybody a few more facts about what this domestic violence incident was, reports are this all stems from a November 28th incident between Brown and a woman. It started off as a verbal altercation, then it became physical, with Brown allegedly throwing a shoe at the woman's head. He actually tried to lock her out of the house, tried to evict her. This all comes because Antonio Brown, I mentioned some of the scandal that he had on the field. Well, he's also gotten into legal trouble as well. In fact, last month, he was ordered to pay $1.2 million to a truck driver after he was arrested for assaulting the driver. Brown pleaded no contest. So this is kind of gives you a backstory of what's happening here. What do you make of that allegation? What do you make of this story against Antonio Brown?
Well, let's be honest. I mean, if we're looking at the past actions of Antonio Brown, it's not stellar, Jesse. It is very obvious, and numerous news outlets have reported, and friends and associations of Antonio Brown have reported that Antonio Brown is battling some type of mental illness, mental situation, which again makes me believe that is more of a reason why law enforcement is not leaving that residence. In a normal circumstance, in a normal domestic violence situation, plenty of times we've gone to serve warrants. We didn't think they were there, or we would say, hey, we're going to come back at a later date to serve this warrant. But there's more to this story, I believe. I think because of Antonio Brown's mental state, his access to weapons, the threats that he's made, his propensity for violence, I think that's why law enforcement is going to stay there, attempt negotiations. It would not surprise me if in the near future or later on today, if we don't see law enforcement or some type of tactical team start to introduce some type of gas element in the house to make it uncomfortable for him to try to surrender. But, in that area, the Florida law enforcement officers, I've had the privilege to work and train with a lot of those guys. They're stellar. They're going to do everything they can to bring this to a peaceful resolution. But, Antonio Brown needs to just man up, say, hey, look, I screwed up, contact his attorney. Let's peacefully surrender and work this thing out.
Yeah, the reports were also that they had contacted his attorney, and doesn't seem that has changed the situation. And you have to imagine that the longer he holds out, the more he's making the situation worse for himself. Before I let you go, Chad, it was so interesting what you said that they might use it. They would maybe go towards ways to make his situation uncomfortable. You mentioned maybe gas of some sort. Could they shut off the water? Could they shut off the electricity? Could they do something like that, or am I totally off?
No, I don't think we would go to that extent yet because, once we start shutting off, and depending on weather and things like that, shutting off power, we've got to be careful and where the areas that I'm from, if we start shutting off electricity in the wintertime, it could cause more damage. But introducing some type of chemical agent that, an eye irritant or something like that, that's going to make it uncomfortable. Many times that's enough to make that person realize, hey, this isn't any fun for me. So, Antonio Brown just needs to, consult with his attorney, stay off the phone. We don't want him on the phone with Kanye or anybody right now. He needs to consult with his attorney and peacefully surrender. But I do think that there will be a time where law enforcement has to take, another step to try to get this resolved.
Chad Ayers, thank you so much for taking the time. And, I'll have you on the show, whether you're in a car, you're in an office, you're on the ground, you're in a park. I'll always have you on the show. Chad, thanks so much.
Jesse, thanks.
And that's all we have for you, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on Sidebar. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.